Hello, Grandma. How you doing? I just wanted to share some cool stuff that we talked about the other day. We talked about the rapture a little bit, and it got me thinking about it. And I was like, you know what? I really want to share some things with Grandma on the rapture that I've learned in the past, and perhaps you've heard it before. But I'll try and be quick. First things first is, a lot of people will say the rapture is not even in the Bible. So I don't know where Christians are getting this rapture. Well, actually, it is. It just depends on what translation you're using. So that actually comes from a Latin translation from the word raptio, is where they get the word rapture. So today in our English Bibles, we use a different word. We use either to be caught up in the air, to seize, or to be carried off. So just because it says different words in the Bible doesn't mean that it's not true. It just simply takes a word study. A lot like people will often say to me, why isn't dinosaurs in the Bible? Why don't we see that word there? And my reply is, well, it is. Dinosaurs wasn't coined until 1842. And so before that, it came from the word dragon, which you see all over the Old Testament. You also see it in tons of ancient manuscripts outside of the Bible in different cultures, which is pretty cool. Um, Studying ancient manuscripts and other cultures, you always find these parallels to Bible stories such as the flood. Anyways, so what I wanted to point out is just some parallels with the wedding feasts, the ancient Jewish wedding feast, and what Jesus was doing with his disciples in the Last Supper, and what Jesus is doing today, and what he plans to do in the future. Now, there's three views of the rapture. Um, you have your pre-tribulation view, you have your mid-tribulation view, and your post-tribulation view. I myself am a pre-tribulation view. I believe the rapture is going to happen before the tribulation, and I think that this parallel in the wedding feast kind of demonstrates why it should be before the tribulation. Then you have some Christians who think that's going to happen in the middle of the tribulation. Then you have some Christians who think it's going to be post. But the important thing is that we all agree that, for the most part, that there will be a rapture. We just don't know when it is. Um, Anyways, let's get started. So Ephesians 5 always refers to, in really the entire Bible, as it refers to the church as the bride for Jesus. Jesus is the groomsman or the bridegroom, and the church is the bride. And what we're going to look at is, again, the parallels we find in the Jewish wedding ceremony in relation to Christ and his church. What I'm going to do to break it up is I'm going to first go over the custom of the wedding ceremony, and then I'll try and go over how Jesus fulfilled that. So the first thing is the marriage covenant and the bride price. Back in the day, in ancient Jewish marriages, when a man wanted to marry a woman, he would have to show up to the woman's house, and he would have to present a contract, a covenant, and a price for the bride. This would normally compensate for the loss of their daughter, and it would actually show the amount of love based on the amount he was willing to pay, how much love he had for his bride. So again, the bride price would normally determine the amount of love, or I would say sacrifice. Maybe some people didn't have much to give, so I would say more of what they were willing to sacrifice. Now, how did Jesus carry this out? Well, at the Passover meal or the Last Supper, Jesus clearly stated to all those gathered around him that he was establishing a new covenant. He was going over the terms of that covenant, and the price of that covenant, we all know, was the breaking of his body and the shedding of his blood to fulfill the necessary requirements for the contract or the covenant. So the bride price was his life. So remember when I said usually the bride price determined the amount of love he had for his bride? Well, no greater love than someone who's willing to die for another. So Jesus demonstrated there how much love he had for his bride by giving his life. And then we had the cup. The next step in the betrothal would involve a pouring and drinking of the cup. So the man would present the contract, and he would pour the wine, and then he would offer it to the woman. Now, if the woman drank from the cup, that meant that she accepted the proposal, and now the couple was betrothed. Now, this was legally binding, and the man would then also drink from the cup to indicate his joy for his bride receiving him. And then at that point, they would both separate and prepare for the actual wedding day. And they weren't permitted to even see each other during this process. And it could last between 12 and 18 months. Now, how did Jesus fulfill this? Well, did he not pour wine and give it to his disciples in the Last Supper or the Passover meal? He did. And each one of the disciples accepted the wine. They drank from it, accepting the terms of the covenant. And at that point that they accepted that, they drank from that wine, the apostles who formed the church were now betrothed to Christ. Now, generally, the man would then, again, leave once this process was done with, and he would also leave gifts for the bride. And these gifts would often help the bride keep her focused on her groom while she waited for his return. And same thing with us and the apostles. Christ left them gifts, left us gifts. And it's intended for us to keep our focus on Christ and to give glory to Christ until he returns. Now, preparing a place. So after that contract or covenant was established, the cup was received, the gifts were given, the man would now depart, and he would go prepare a place for his bride. Now, the groom would normally just add a addition onto his father's house. And it was according to his father's specifications. His father would tell him what he wanted, and so he would have to build it according to what his father wanted. And this would be a place where the couple would come after he came and got his bride and spend 7 days together. It was called the wedding chamber, and the 7 days was considered kind of like a honeymoon that we do today. Now, Jesus did the same thing. He said the same thing to his disciples. He said that he was going to go away and prepare a place, and that he would come back and get his bride. And he had to return to his father's house to do that. Once the room was done, the man would have to wait for his father to actually release him to go claim his bride. When the people would ask the groomsmen, hey, when are you going to go get your bride? When's this wedding going on? He would actually answer by saying, I don't know, only my father knows. It was his father's obligation or his father's job to tell him when it would be, but he wouldn't tell him before, and he wouldn't tell anybody else. Only the father knew the time or the hour. And same thing with the disciples. They asked Jesus, hey, when would these things be? And what did Jesus say? Only the Father knows. I don't know. Okay, and then you have the waiting bride. While the groom was away, the bride had a responsibility as well. She was to ready herself to get prepared. She was bought with a price, and so were we as a church. She would often wear a veil over her head in public to show others that she's set apart, she's been taken, she's been bought with a price, she belongs to another. And same with the Christian. It should be easily identified that we belong to another. We should also be set apart. She would also save all her money in preparation for this period. This was called her dowry. Traditionally, the groomsmen would come at night, and so she had to have her bags packed, and she had to have her lamps filled with oil ready at her bedside. And she would also even sleep in her wedding gown because she didn't know the day or the hour. And as the bride of Christ, we too should be preparing, waiting for Christ. And this is probably why you hear the story about the woman ecstatic and rejoicing when she finds her one lost coin in Luke 15. It was probably her dowry, and it was their job to keep it safe and secure to demonstrate their love to their groom. And so, for a woman to lose her dowry probably was significant. So you can see why she probably rejoiced in Luke 15 when she found it. Now, the coming groom. The day would finally come when the father would release his son and he would go get his bride. Now, the man would go ahead of his father to the gate of the city where his bride was, and he would blow a trumpet. And upon leaving or hearing this, the bride would get up and meet him at the gate. And then he would then take her to the wedding chamber where they would spend their 7 days together. Jesus says the same thing in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and 5. He talks about coming and sounding a trumpet and us being caught up and meeting him in the air. Now, the 7 days in the wedding chamber. Again, the man takes the woman for 7 days to the wedding chamber. 7 days, a lot of the time in the Bible, refers to years. So in our time, this could be a 7-year time. While the wedding party would actually wait to gather until they returned and they heard that the wedding or the marriage had been consummated. So the Jews believed that there was going to be this 7 year of time or time of trouble upon the earth, and they called it Jacob's trouble. I believe it's in Daniel. It would be the birth pains of the Messiah. It was believed that the righteous would be resurrected before this great time. And we know that time today as the Great Tribulation. And I just wanted to leave you with that, the parallels there, and why I believe that we will be raptured before the tribulation. Again, Christ says that the church is his bride. So one day Jesus is going to come back and get his bride. In the meantime, Christians should be preparing. We should be getting ready. We should be sober-minded. And we should be prepared for the return of our bridegroom. For more information on this, you can actually go to these resources. So you have this on Amazon Prime. I don't know if you have access to that, but you could watch that. It kind of breaks it down. And then you also have this book here, which you actually recommended to me a while ago, which a lot of this information's in it, and it's pretty good. So I wanted to share that with you. Hope it wasn't too long. Thanks for listening. Bye.